And then
Welcome to the Jira Life, the place to find news, events, and interviews with the Atlassian Community's movers and shakers. Join our hosts, Alex, Dr. Jira Ortiz, and Rodney, the Jira guy Nissen, as well as the Jira amigos in the peanut gallery, as we sit down and discuss the latest going on in the Atlassian ecosystem. Because we didn't choose the Jira Life chose us.
Hello.
hello there.
Hello, everyone.
And a very special thanks to our sponsor for making this episode possible.
Alex has to bring something. So, Alex, I have to ask, another interesting week over on this side of the country. How you doing, man?
We're good. The winds have finally subsided, so I think we're okay.
And no earthquake?
Not yet.
Wait for it.
Don't be jinxing things. I still gotta go fix my pool. My solar did break for like a day and a half.
Do you just need to sweep it off?
You had to tap it. I turned it off, and then you turn it back on, and then there's like a little icon that says like tap like this. So I just banged on the box, and it worked again.
Percussive maintenance.
Yeah, I'm surprised it worked.
All right. We have...
If only Jericho worked that way.
I mean, if you had data center, it would, but... Well, we have two amazing guests with us today. They are the co-founders of Atlas Advantage. We have Peter Van Voorde, who is also a fellow Atlassian creator. Then we have Dan, I'm going to butcher this name, but Hardiker with us. Dan comes with a pretty amazing pedigree here. He is one of the co-founders of Adaptivist. He helped found what eventually became the Atlassian Marketplace. He had a hand in developing the first apps. So for our topic today, he is absolutely someone you want to talk about on it.
A legend is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Both of these are legends, though.
we definitely you are amongst legends, I guess.
Yes, indeed. We've been around for a while. Hey,
So
Matt.
Peter, you and I spoke back in June of last year. Was this already a thing back then?
No. So Atlas Advantage, we basically launched this end of November last year. Dan and I have been talking about this in September, but I've been doing consulting and coaching for marketplace partners for a while now. I think since this period last year. But Dan was there at the beginning of the ecosystem. I've been here since 2007. I've done all the things. I've said hello to some of the oldest ACE leaders in the world when they first did their first ACE. I was already there. I've helped found the Atlassian developer community. I was one of the founding members from the Atlassian side of the Ecosystem Council, which is now the Marketplace Partner Advisory Council. I've been here and I've done all of the things already. And this now is because Dan and I got talking. We want to help the marketplace. We want to help the partners. We want to help Atlassian build for the future, connect to people, make those bridges. We felt like pre-COVID, there was more of a community in the ecosystem. And we kind of want to bring that back. The community of partners and Atlassians working together to create a brighter future. Forging ahead, like you would say.
You just pulled a punch today, right? Because we're connecting and forging.
Yeah. It's 11 p.m., but I'm still kind of on.
Still focused. I love it when great minds come together. I think this is such a great initiative and great effort because, yeah, as you mentioned, right? We have Atlas Camp and then crickets.
Yep.
Yes, those things kind of, happen. But it is something from Atlassian, it's also really difficult to communicate well to partners because as soon as they communicate something, they get a lot of not always positive feedback. And so they're like, okay, we need to be more careful on how we communicate. And then you get the feedback, you don't communicate enough. So there's always trying to find that balance. And I've been on the Atlassian side. I used to run Atlas camps, run app weeks. communicate with marketplace partners from Atlassian, and there's always trying to find that balance. And that's something I feel like they actually struck, like I feel like they found the right tone and balance in this article. It is about, let's do this together. This is going to happen, but let's do this together. Let's work on this together. And I have to give props to Kieran, like he really put it in there, like, I want to hear your feedback. Give me the feedback. We're going to do this together. We're not just going to mandate and set dates. No, we want to work together with partners. And I'm hopeful partners are going to respond to this and say, yes, we want to work with Atlassian too. We know this is happening. We could fight it, or we could join you in the effort of building out this next platform.
So what are we talking about here? Last week, Atlassian announced that they don't have a hard date for the End of Life Connect, but they are definitely going to end of life at some point.
So I hear another 24-hour live stream, right?
Yeah, well, really what we heard was the quiet bit out loud. We've known for some time that Forge is the future. I mean, just listen to the quantity of content coming around feature improvements, and you're seeing the updates and the endpoints that have been added and what has been end of life to what has been rolled off in terms of the features and functionality. It's been very clear with Atlassian's filings that moving from cloud first to enterprise first, and enterprise require trust, which require a understanding about how things are working and control over data, and there's data exfiltration is a big concern for enterprise customers. And so running inside of the Atlassian cloud and not having egress becomes a big thing. And so Forge becomes obviously the future that fits into what their stated mission is. And so the fact that Connect is now taking not just a back burner, but been told that you're on the way out. And let's be very clear, this is not much of an update. It really isn't. All it's saying is that quiet bit that we've always really known, especially if you're paying attention out loud, which is, oh guys, we are planning of end-of-lifing. And when we say end-of-lifing, it's not turn off. This is just, we're going to stop developing this at some point. And the first phase of it was really interesting. The first phase was, we're going to stop new apps coming in. So you've got like 6 months on the minimum end of these milestones and the phases they're going through of just not creating a net new Connect app. So if you've got a new idea, it shouldn't be in Connect. Your new idea should be in Forge. I mean, Atlassian's messaging around that has been pretty clear for a year, is that if you're already planning to build a brand new Connect app, are you crazy? I mean, what? I mean, sure, go ahead. Let's go off and create a bunch of brand new DC apps while we're at it. There's a whole area where Atlassian is focused on growing its market, which has definitely been in the cloud and on Forge. And if you lean into Atlassian, and obviously, why wouldn't you if you're leaning into the marketplace, go with Atlassian and go Forge and go cloud.
I mean, I'm just comparing this to the last end of life announcement they made, which was server, and beyond just the whole headache of how it was announced, it seems like they took a very different approach with this one, a much softer approach. Like, look, we're going to work with you. We're going to try and get things to the point where you can just migrate your app from Connect to Forge. But this is coming down the road, and you do need to know about it. Do you see that? Is that something you guys are seeing or sensing from this, or what's your thoughts?
For me, it's definitely, I'm getting the same feeling as you do, Rodney. I also think about, like, this is change management. This is change management at a global scale. And in change management, you need to be very clear about why you're doing this. What are the next steps? Take those steps slowly. Bring people along with you on this journey. Because otherwise, people are going to be like, I don't want to change. Why are you doing this? Life is happy right now. We don't need to move. We don't need to do new things. I don't want to work hard to get this done. So it's really clear that here they're trying to set, look, these are the steps we're going to take. They've been talking about the why for over a year, but now it's like, okay, these are the steps, but they're still very open-ended. It's not like in 6 months, this is this, in 12 months, this, and in 18 months, this. No. They want to take the community with them. That's why they're asking for feedback. That's why they're saying we're doing all of these sessions. And I'm sure at Atlas Camp in Brussels next month, there's going to be a lot of talking about this part, this timing, this journey. And I feel like the way this is written, the way they're doing this, feels like an olive branch of, hey, we know we didn't do it very well the last time, so we're trying to do differently. Bear with us and help us make this a success.
Is
And
this the first time that this has happened? Like, was there a precursor to Connect?
there were several. So the original one was basically, here's the Jira or Confluence source code, hack around, whatever you want to do.
Fun.
Then there was the first plugin system, the P1 plugin system, which was basically OSGI, jars, all the things you could do around with Java mostly. And then they've built Connect, and now they're building Forge. So this is not the first time we're moving.
Okay.
This is definitely the first time that we get, and it's not even the first time that you get less access as an app vendor, but you get less choice now going to Forge. There are certain things you can no longer pick and choose from. You need to work within what Atlassian gives you. More than you used to do with Connect, more than you used to do with the P1 framework. So every single time, like that,
You're losing power.
the sandbox is getting smaller to play.
Right.
So you need to be more creative in how you play with whatever it's in there. Which
Why
is
do you think Atlassian does that? Why do you think that's their operating model?
and
So-
it's, well, then you can answer this question.
So this Connect is the first cloud plugin platform. So this was the way of building Atlassian applications after plugins v2, which still and currently does run inside of DC server, which is the OSGI model of you run in the application. One of the biggest constraints that has is that you also run inside of the same memory model. And so if your plugin performs badly, then your Jira instance or Confluence runs badly as well. There's also a blockage, so if it's slow or if it causes errors, it takes the entire system down. And so they were very clear that they wanted that separation of concerns. They didn't want you in the runtime. They didn't want you in the pipeline. They wanted you to be able to crash and for that not to affect the main app. Also, your performance shouldn't impact the user experience of the main app. And also, they were very aware that with the plugins previously, they'd put so much extensibility in that upgrading and migrating and taking that functionality to a new platform became increasingly hard. So what we found with Connect was both that it became more of a handoff process. So you got an iframe that you would load your content into. Those iframes were more strategically placed into places that they had a business case to create extensibility. They weren't just putting extensibility everywhere just in case. And finally, you were in Connect world, you're responsible for running the infrastructure and you're responsible for responding to it. So when the iframe pops up and you load the chart, you run the Lambdas yourself in AWS, or maybe you're running in Heroku or DigitalOcean, or you've got something somewhere that's loading that content in somewhere.
But isn't that better than the Forge method, which is monopolized to Atlassian?
Well, Forge means that you no longer have to care about that operation. So you don't have to worry about scalability. Atlassian now do that for you. You don't have to care about DevOps and deployability. Atlassian care about that. You don't have to care about security about your pipeline and whether someone is being malicious, because Atlassian do that for you. And from a customer point of view, if you've got 25 apps installed, I don't have to now look at Atlassian and 25 app vendors and assess each and every one of those for making sure that they can control, they are properly handling my data, both from a GDPR point of view or ISO 27001. Forge means Atlassian keep hold of that data, except for where there's egress. And those egress requests are explicitly stated because there are lots of cloud services down to launch darkly that you might want to use for feature flagging. And Atlassian do that extensively, and etc. There's a whole ton of stuff where you want to take that data, but each of those egresses points becomes a potential data exfiltration risk. And for Forge, runs on Atlassian means that Atlassian will take your app code, and as an app vendor, you're still responsible for building the code and the configuration, and all of those concerns now go away. Now, one of the things that you would say then is, well, given that they're going to give a pathway towards Connect being turned on, surely Forge now can do everything Connect does. No. That's the rub, right?
That would be too simple.
And that really is where the concern lies. And that might ever be. Just like there are things that you can do in server in DC because you run inside of the memory model that you just can't do, just even conceptually, you just can't do them inside of the cloud. So take an app that looks that runs on DC. It often has been reimagined and looks different in the cloud. In fact, even features that you see inside of DC are implemented differently inside of the cloud. Part of it is because it just works differently and doesn't fit in the same model and mechanism of operation.
But why do you think Atlassian went down that path though? Like why create such disparity between the two models?
I don't think that was their intention. They weren't sitting here going, how many of these features can we hurt? What they came back was a reimagination of resolving customer pain. And as you start to resolve that pain and you resolve it for what makes sense in the cloud and what makes sense for this way of thinking, you end up with that divergence. And if you remember, back in the years of Contegix, going back to 2006, 2009, you had something called Jira Hosted. That was a multi-tenant version of Jira. It was actually Jira just run by someone else in someone else's data center, long before AWS. Mm-hmm. There was something called the Great Fork, and that happened 2013-ish. My memory fades this long past. But there was a fork where Jira was cloned into the cloud and was running in the cloud, and then they first took authentication off and then started breaking off the different bits of the services into microservices running in the cloud. They had a few experiments of running Kubernetes clusters in DC and running the microservices behind the firewall and trying to keep them. But that was never going to work because of the complicated nature of keeping the system on life support. You couldn't expect a customer to be able to do. But Atlassian can have a whole DevOps team that run their microservices and their service mesh. And as that breaks up and what that means and how that works, that all starts to create that divergence I was talking about. And so why we're here is inevitable. But the question to ask then is, well, what does the future look like for the people who have got apps that are on Connect and currently can't move on? And what happens to their customers and the needs and the demands behind them? And that's a really interesting question.
What's Atlassian talking about there? Like, what are they sharing? Have they shared anything? Or are they just sorry?
The blog post that you wrote, Peter, referenced an acknowledgement. Kieran acknowledged that gap, right? And Atlassian said, we're trying to close this gap and we're working towards it. And they have a public roadmap of those things that aren't working and what they're doing with it. One could infer from the lack of a timeline that it's not static, that they're saying we're aware and we need to hear more. Let's ask the obvious question: why announce this now in this way? And what is their motivation? What might they want to happen as a result of announcing it like this, and not even waiting like 2 weeks for camp? This is the sort of thing you'd expect on the stage, right? And we all knew this, so it's no surprise to anyone who's awake and paying attention to Atlassian's direction. So what is even the use of it? I would argue that I take this as more than a smoke signal, that you should be looking at the technology adoption life cycle and working out where you are. Are you in those innovators and early adopters? Do you have plugins that are easy to move over to Forge? This is your signal to do it. This is, hey, that train's going to leave that station at some point. Why aren't you getting on this? Or why are you building more technical debt and putting more complexity into your Connect infrastructure when you could just look to move to Forge? And once you're on Forge, you're safe, and then you can grow there. So if you can move, why haven't you already? Then you're in the early majority of, well, we've got some rubs, and here's why we can't. So yeah, you've gone and done that assessment, and you've got those 3, 5, 10, whatever it is, reasons why I've not moved to Forge already. Now's your chance to go to Atlassian and comment on this blog post. Give them the feedback and go, here's what's stopping me. Guess what that's going to do to that roadmap? It's going to give them the feedback they need to know how fast should we push that pedal. If they're getting from everyone, this is great and it's going along, and we're not doing it because we'd rather spend our time adding features, that's not going to go down too well. But if I literally can't do the thing you're asking me to do because I can't implement the feature, and if you have a look at bodied macros and the conversation that happened around that recently, that's a great example of Atlassian hearing rapid feedback and course correcting as a result of it. They need more of this. They need a lot more of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a wonderfully privileged position to be able to now shout at people who are standing up saying, we're listening.
Yeah, so I do want to add 2 things to that one, to what Dan said. First, I agree with the feedback. One of the reasons why they posted it now is to get that feedback. Why didn't they wait until Atlas Camp? It is to make sure this is top of mind for anybody going to Atlas Camp. Yeah, otherwise, a lot of stuff might be top of mind. Now it's very clear what's going to be top of mind at Atlas Camp. So they're basically pre-announcing this. So everybody now knows what Atlas Camp is going to be about. Everybody's going to come into Atlas Camp with the mindset of, okay, this is what we need to talk about. So that's going to help.
Connect.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to walk in and say, okay, so what's this plan? Like, we got to get off this thing. How do we do that?
I agree with Dan. Give as much feedback as you can. Do it from a positive intent and say, like, this is what I'm struggling with, because don't assume Atlassian knows everything you're doing. Don't assume Atlassian knows everything that's being built out there. They don't. They can't. There's over 6,000 apps out there. Atlassian has no idea what most of those apps do, let alone how they do it. And developers can be very, very creative in how they use APIs and all the services available to us. So don't assume this. Reach out. Tell them what you're doing with Connect. Tell them what you can't do with Forge yet, so they can actually build that roadmap, so they can build out and have the information they need to be successful, so you can be successful in Forge too.
I'll shout it out from our sponsor of this channel here. One of the things that they've been working on is backing up forms, so your JSM forms, right? And so while you can back up the form itself and you can retain, like, here's the title, here's the request type, when you restore it, you can't bring the fields. You can bring the screen and them, but you can't pop the fields right where they were because there's no Forge ability to do that. That's a really great, I like that. That'd be a great example of, like, hey, maybe you got to let Atlassian know, because they might not know that somebody needs to access those JSM forms fields.
You need to go a step further and remember who you're going to talk to and what they'll do with this feedback. So this feedback goes from an engineer who hears it, and probably someone in the community team, who then lets an engineer know. And let's say they just say, yes, we do need to assess this and change this. It then goes to a PM, and in order for any change to actually happen. So you don't just need to say the what, you need to say the why. Why do you need this? Why does it need to work that particular way? What other ways could it work and aren't appropriate to do? Give them the fullest answer you can to help them understand the problem fully, rather than the, why can't you just give me the endpoint? Yeah. Give me the endpoint that does this thing, because that won't work. What you need to do is give them the reason to build the endpoint and explain the use case that they missed. Because they're not building Forge going, we'll start off and here's an iframe and good luck. They are thinking through what could be built. I mean, when they presented bodies macros, they're like, we looked at what people could do, and we thought that we only need to read the content of the body of the macro on the first edit. I mean, that sounds crazy from a person who does apps all day long and has built lots of different versions of this already. But that might not be from the position that they're coming from. And if I come at them angrily and going, why on earth didn't you see me? That's not going to help. If I say, hey, here's a picture that seems obvious to me, does this look obvious to you when I present it like this? And how can I help you see this picture both now and in the future, because you missed it? You weren't trying to harm me. You weren't trying to do anything that looked to me silly or stupid. And so me just calling you silly or stupid doesn't help. Actually, me explaining, here's what you missed. Here's me, see me. And now I feel seen. And that really is the way to get through to the people behind to get your message in.
I want to cover a scenario I'm told exists. I have yet to meet anyone who falls under this myself, but Atlassian swears some of these people exist, and it's customers that have built their own homebrew Connect apps for their cloud instances. We in the community, we're really well connected. When these kind of things come up, word does get around because we see each other's posted stuff, and especially in the marketplace. How do we get this news to them, and how do we help them when the situation is, look, I'd love to convert this app I did 6 years ago into Forge, but the person who wrote it isn't even here anymore, and we're so behind on technical debt that we can't even get to this until we don't know when.
That is a really interesting question that doesn't really have an easy answer. It's outreach, so they need to create awareness. I think that's also why this is on the public Atlassian product blog instead of on just CDEC or developer or deck. So to get more people to be aware of it, I think I'm hoping they're going to email all of the app vendors directly too, and all the technical contacts, and say, look, this is what's happening. Make sure you're this is the roadmap. These are the different steps we're taking. This is what you can do to migrate. I might see an opportunity there for partners too, to tell those customers, hey, if you don't have anybody left to actually migrate this Connect app and it's critical to your infrastructure and to your way of working, we can do it for you for a fee. Like there's maybe a business opportunity there for certain partners. But in the end, communication goes two ways. If something is critical to your infrastructure, I'm sure you will be signing up for newsletter. You will be signing up for notifications to get information about that. It is those places where that Connect app has been quietly running since 2014, that nobody knows that it's a Connect app. Those places are going to be surprised when suddenly it breaks.
I think it's harder to have, that's easier to happen with V2. With Connect apps, you need to run some infrastructure. You need a Lambda running somewhere. Something needs to be deployed, something needs to hit, and quite often those things change and evolve. If you're running on a Lambda, the runtimes get updated every couple of years, and someone must be aware of them. I can imagine how in a very large organization, someone just spun something up in their own personal AWS sandbox and connected it and ran it, and that's now doing something in the same way that the CFO's blog might be still running on a Windows laptop sat under the desk and stops working when he goes home at the end of the day, or something of that nature. But I'm not really that worried about that because tooling will come. Tooling will come for Atlassian to be aware of the remainder. And we talked about, I talked about the early majority. They're in the late majority. They're definitely the laggards. When Atlassian is down to the last few, you'd be very aware. Atlassian, as the EAs, are very aware of every single DC customer they've got left because there's a big focus to move up to the cloud. There'll come a time where Atlassian and the ecosystem are very aware of every Connect app that's left, what it's doing, why it's still around. We're talking about phase 3 in the shutdown phase of trying to get people off. There's going to be a big focus on, well, what's left? What is left?
You don't see any possibility of Forge going into DC?
Oh, no. Zero.
No.
I mean,
But what happens if Atlassian doesn't kill DC?
DC cannot run inside of for a myriad of we can sit and talk about the technical architecture and what a plugins v3 might look like. I can imagine you would try and get apps off process, but DC is such a different system that the whole APIs is completely, you cannot write, so you can write an app that's cross-platform between Jira and Confluence on DC. You cannot write a Confluence app that is cross-platform between Confluence DC on V2 and Confluence Cloud. They're basically re-implementations. So it's different imagining of the same problem. It all just doesn't work.
Have you guys ever heard of Musical Road by Edwards Air Force Base in California?
No.
I saw a YouTube video about it.
Yeah, there's a road where you drive over it and right?
Yeah.
But they built it wrong. The grooves are not aligned. So it sounds instead of the song, it goes dun 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 dun. It's a horrible thing. But the genius is the sound thing was a problem, so they rebuilt it in a new spot farther into the desert with the exact same spec and didn't solve the problem. So that reminded me of what you just said. Like they're reimagining the same problem.
A lot of misunderstandings from the ecosystem come from seeing Atlassian take an action and the ecosystem misunderstands the intent. And behind that then becomes an assumption, and behind that becomes then an emotive, and all of those things are, oh, you're trying to do this thing. Whereas if you lean into, well, why are they trying to do, what are they trying to get out from this? What are they wanting to do? Then quite often the answer becomes rather obvious. And in this case, it would never make sense to re-implement what we had behind it. It caused them so much pain. Every time they re-platform like this, when they went from plugins V1 to plugins V2, the reason that OSGI exists and what Don Brown built was mostly around isolation, to keep one plugin from disrupting others and to make sure you're not using private APIs and to make sure that you're upgradable. That was all designed around the key pains. And to some extent, there's a baby in a bathwater problem of we start again, focused on all the problems and forget all the things that we did well because we're so focused on trying to solve it. But that's engineering. Anytime you see anyone hit the reset and start greenfield, they do exactly the same. Anytime someone decides to come up with a competitor to anything, they're like, I'm going to solve all of those things that people complain most about. And then they miss that magic source of what made it so good. And that's why everything feels so different. And so it's why, interestingly, Confluence feels a lot more like Notion in the cloud than it does like Confluence DC, because it's been very much fixing live editing and all of the issues that we have. And guess what? The best editing experience that I can think of in the cloud happens to be Notion for that sort of thing. So no surprise it feels very similar because they're solving very similar problems.
Yeah. And then
so
but by making this announcement, then are they kind of basically, because if what you said is true, then cause and effect, are they, by making the announcement of Connect phasing out, then it's most likely going to be in alignment with DC phasing out completely?
Oh, I would not tie those together.
Why? Because you can't build on it.
But DC is the issues that Atlassian have with DC are very, the customer-facing issues that exist there are very, very different to the issues that Atlassian are hearing from customers around Forge, right? Well, specifically Connect and what they're trying to solve with Forge. I mean, roll back to like 2018, 2017, when the first version of Forge was announced, and how slowly it moved until it gained real traction, because it was supposed to solve a niche issue of data exfiltration. And wouldn't it be great? And it's not just that, because you realize that how easy it is for a developer who is running their own, a Jira administrator who happens to also be a developer, running their own DC. Well, they're probably running their own server because it was server back then. And they can just knock together an app that's got 20 lines of code, uses a few APIs, does some automation. Wonderful, great. Roll it in as a jar. Now we Connect, they've got to go off and build a descriptor. Then they have to set up a sandbox environment. And now they have to go off and go through and reimagine everything as iframes and APIs. And the APIs aren't well documented. And those APIs I can't really get to because I don't have the source code for cloud. But I did have it for server, so I could just figure that out myself. So I'm really reliant on the accuracy of that. And then it goes, all of those operational concerns become much more hard work for your citizen developer. For there's not that many citizen apps. So Jamie Eklund, for example, of Script Runner fame, the Script Runner came from him just working at his company. And he solved this problem for himself and then just kicked it out as an app and says, hey, this is for others. That sort of type of path for an app developer has gone. We've not had new ones of those in the last, I want to say, decade. Because more and more of it has become around professional app building. Now, Forge lowers that bar again. You can just knock together a script. Hell, you can even ask Rovo to build it for you. And now you've got your own app. And that's because Atlassian have taken away all this pain and made it seamless for you just to run. Now, is it a short list of things you can do right now comparatively to what you can do in Connect? Yes. Why that roadmap exists. But it doesn't just solve the operation issue. It doesn't just solve the problem of data coming out. It also widens the market of potential for who can build things.
I mean, I want to touch on that point because I saw an article Monday from our friend / rival, Brittany Joyner, saying, I almost wish Forge would come to Trello because I just built a Forge app for Confluence in like 5 minutes.
Yep.
And that's Brittany Joyner. I mean, that's the Trello queen herself. So you were talking about lowering the bar. I mean, I know she's a coder in her own right. She was a programmer before she started doing community stuff and marketing stuff. But going from I have this idea to I have something in Confluence that fast really speaks to how quick it is to get something going on it.
Yeah. And so I'd like to pick on what Sarah just said, which is, well, it's great for customers, right? But what does that mean for partners? Well, there's a difference between a really comprehensive solution that solves a use case and a pain point on how do we, to pick on, let's say, K15T and PDF exporting, and the array of the library of different things that you can do. It is a well-polished product now. That's very different from, hey, can I take my page and just export it into a PDF or get it on a wallboard or solve my hacked together thing? They're different things. And we want more of those rough and ready exploration of ideas of things that do and don't work, because actually that's where Script Runner itself came from, which is now one of the most popular apps in the whole ecosystem, making a lot of money for a partner. And that's that came from someone just going, hey, I've got this thing. Can I? And then realizing actually this thing has got value to others. Customers being able to solve their own problems. That's what Connect, you can't really do with Connect. And as was said, some customers have, but like you pointed out, they're rare. They're so rare, we suspect they might be hen's teeth. I think that's going to change with Forge, because there is a push to citizen developers. There is a push to say, here's how you can build your own checklist or thing. I mean, I've had a hack around myself. We store a bunch of our data inside of Confluence, and the tables are rudimentary, and we want some logic on top of there that doesn't fit into Confluence databases. Oh, just build a wrapping macro. That'll do. It's how I happened across the limitations of the bodied macros in the first place. It's seeing that, and I'm just a developer. We're not building apps for people to do. We're just consuming them like every other user. And it's nice to see that start to come back.
Something I want to touch on here, because I remember this very clearly back when cloud started to grow in popularity and Atlassian really started to pivot towards cloud first. And you had a bunch of partners who had these legacy server and DC apps who suddenly need to make versions of these for the cloud. And obviously back then it was primarily Connect. And I was having a conversation with a marketplace partner. I had just finished a review of their app. We were talking about it after it got published. And they're like, look, I get what you're saying. The functionality is not the same between two. But really, when we're looking at moving from on-prem to cloud, we need to start, rather than give them feature equity, we need to give them value equity. We need to make sure what we're delivering to them has the same value to what we have done in the past, because we're never going to be able to get the same feature set across that threshold.
Indeed.
Yes.
I see a lot of that come. This is ever since I read Peter's article and the one that inspired it. That conversation has been coming back to my head constantly, because I think we're about to have another cycle of that where people are going to have to start reimagining their apps.
Yeah.
Because they can't necessarily provide the same features, because Forge is a different creature. Atlassian is working on that. I'm not saying that there's not the roadmap there, but app vendors also need to start thinking about, okay, how do I deliver the same value, even though it's going to be fundamentally a different product?
It's basically a next step in our evolution. So we call ourselves an ecosystem. What does an ecosystem do? Evolve all the time. If we don't evolve, we die. So basically, this is the next step in the evolution. And it's going to be an interesting time of reimagining, like you said, Rodney, our value to bring, maybe finding new value we can bring, finding new ways and ideas, and then really letting our imagination fly, because we are constrained in certain ways, but constraint also helps with like figuring out those things, but figuring out those problems. And Like, I've worked with developers all my professional career. Developers are problem solvers. We love good old problems and figuring it out, breaking them up into smaller parts and making something amazing with them. The weirder we build it together, the better. And I feel like we're entering a time where Forge is giving us this opportunity, both as like a small in-company developer who just wants to build a small thing and maybe turn it into the next scripter eventually, who knows? But also everybody who's been in the ecosystem for a long time. It's a time for you to reflect, rethink what you're doing, rethink about that value you bring and how you can reimagine it, how you can reimagine your app. What do your customers still need? It's a good time to go and talk to your customers and ask them, hey, what is the value we're actually getting from our app? Is it still the same thing that you were getting from it 5 years ago? Is it something new? And build around those kind of things. But it's also scary because you might find out that your app no longer has value on Forge. And you might reinvent yourself completely and find a new app to do or a new ecosystem to do it.
But that assumes then that you also have a budget and overhead to do this.
But that's not. That doesn't really matter. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're running a business, right? Your business and your apps don't deliver features. People get confused about this constantly because they code features, right? And they have features that go into their board. They announce features. You solve pain. That's all you do is you provide a solution to the pain.
But that's for any business everywhere. If you want to stay in business,
and it's crazy that. So why don't we realize this? It's obvious, right? But we are solving a pain that the customer has. It's a gap in the market, and we are giving them a solution to that pain. Now, as the capabilities and the possibilities change, you need to be able to continually address, are we solving the right pain in the right way? Are we still delivering the right features to do the right thing? Almost always you can get stuck into the logical fallacy that because what we did yesterday worked yesterday, it'll work today and it'll work tomorrow. And that's not true. The world evolves around you and you have to constantly wonder, am I doing the right thing? Not just for me, but for my customers.
You got to talk to Southwest as they're still running Windows 98 or Windows XP or whatever it was.
People often either are ignorant or surprised when they get disrupted. And disruption comes because someone found a better way to solve the same pain you do. And they're not
telling me there's hope for all those tempo killers, right? Like
I'm telling you, well, I don't know, because I'm not saying that their new way is any better, because we also covered earlier that you can throw the baby out with the bathwater and you forget to keep what people love. And sometimes, Jira Cloud and Confluence Cloud is kind of an obvious example of I named the same thing in the cloud and it's going off in the comments as to why did they call it the same thing. It's one of my biggest frustrations and I don't know, but I would imagine that if I was an Atlassian, it'd be my biggest regret of not rebranding it and taking, I see why that was an obvious thing to do back then because it takes the audience, right? Someone is using Jira on the server or in DC, oh, let's go to our SaaS version. It's Jira. Yes, let's use it. But that sets an expectation that it's the same. That expectation is already set at parity, and I think we can be honest and say it's not.
I think
they are different products.
Atlassian just love the word Jira because the amount of times I have to explain work management, service management, product discovery, align, and software to people.
So
still, the biggest brand awareness is the word Jira, not Atlassian.
That's what I'm looking at.
Say this. When I was at Atlassian, there was actually the idea briefly to rebrand the company to Jira because the market value of Jira was higher than the market value of Atlassian.
So Atlassian makes missed opportunities.
There was a massive move when the logo changed in order to focus on Atlassian. And we are Atlassian. And Jira barely got mentioned. Jira was mentioned when they were talking about the tool and the tool alone. Now, but people are using Jira. People are aware of Jira and the Jira brand. It is so great that ship has sailed. There's no way to correct that. There is no re-steering from this. You're all in at this point. There's no, and so once you're at this position, it's nice to talk about history and legacy and why we're here. But when we talk about where we're going, you have to fit within the cone of realistic possibilities going forward, and to think that at some point, I'll be able to take my use case that works on DC, doesn't work in cloud. Is it ever going to? But the customers are still going to have that pain. Maybe they don't, and you're fighting the tide, and you will lose like you try. Maybe it's worse. You're fighting a tsunami, and that tsunami is just going to take you out. And maybe that's the heat death of the universe style logical end to your endeavor of whatever you're doing. I mean, it's fine to build on a burning platform, but please know you're on a burning platform, and you're there to. Anyone who's working in migrations must know, literally, they are shrinking their margin every time they're successful, because their market gets smaller and smaller, and at some point there'll either be people who can't migrate or won't migrate, and that's it. You're done.
Yeah,
so if you're focusing on that market, you are on a burning platform in terms of a market space. But that doesn't mean there isn't money to be made. It doesn't mean that there aren't customers to be helped. But why are you doing it? What are you doing it? And be aware of the train that's in front of you that you're running towards while it's honking its horn and flashing its light. And please don't complain when you get run over, because it was coming and you knew it. And you can feign surprise, just like this Connect. The amount of times that we were both sat in the chats that were going off and people going, Connect, how dare they? Oh, why are they doing this? And it's going to make us lives harder. I mean, really? Come on, really? I mean, I'll say it. You deserve to get run over at this point. If you're going to close your eyes and run around on the freeway. Come on.
It's just the beauty of technology. This is you either adapt or you get ran over. We've seen this historically since the first transistor.
So my advice to every partner that's listening to this, wondering what does this mean to me? It means you stop fighting the tide. Be aware of where it's going. Listen to what they're saying. Stop trying to say, Atlassian aren't listening and changing their minds. Because Atlassian aren't going to change their minds on this. Maybe Atlassian aren't listening, aren't aware they're about to run you over. I mean, it is a terrible thing for Atlassian to release a feature that kills an app that they didn't know was there. That's a heinous crime, and it has happened, and we are working hard with other people to make that clear. But if you're ahead implementing an obvious next feature that Atlassian is going to grab, and you're like, oh, really? They've now implemented it? Really? If you didn't know that, if you're not working with Atlassian, then, well, actually, that's you're the fool.
I didn't want to ask you about that. Does Atlassian offer programs, or historically have they offered a program where, kind of like Apple, where you bring the developers in-house to just talk with the developers in-house?
So, I think you mean App Week?
Yes, those are App Weeks. I can talk about App Weeks a long time, but basically it's a program we started when I was at Atlassian, where we bring developers from the Atlassian team, so like let's say GSM, together with app vendors who are building specifically for those platforms. And they talk about the APIs, they talk about the problems they're facing, they talk about like the use cases they're trying to solve. And those weeks, like, for example, you've got Atlas Camp in Brussels happening. That's 2 days. The rest of the week is actually an app week focused on Forge. And you can sign up for that if you're already signed up for Atlas Camp. And those weeks are really, really focused on bringing those two ends of the spectrum, the engineers who are actually building the code at Atlassian and the engineers who are building the app code together directly in a single room, instead of having product manager talk to product manager, talk to whatever, like the telephone game. And in the past, we've seen really, really good results from this. Like we've seen feature requests being rolled out in the same week. We've seen long-running like problems and bugs being fixed in that same week, because suddenly the engineers at Atlassian get why this is a problem. Because instead of yelling at them that they should solve this problem, they're being explained to why this is a problem and what's the effect of this problem. And then they're like, oh, it's obvious we should solve this. So yes, we're doing this. Oh, well, Atlassian is doing this. I used to do this, sorry. But that's definitely what they do with the app weeks. And I know they do like two of those a year. I would love for them to do more, but it's very it's not an easy thing to do.
I wanted to talk about pricing. So when you're an app developer and you're pricing out your app Connect versus Forge, and given the fact that Forge is not going to be free in the future, what do the partners usually go through, or what's the thought process there?
I mean, that's easy. It's the same. I mean, it takes you the same level. Usually it takes the same amount of effort to build. Your margins are about the same. You're not running the cost, so it's actually cheaper to run on Forge right now. So you're saving money by running on Forge, but it's costing you features because you're spending your time doing the migration. If it's a new app, then it's cheaper for you to deliver that on Forge because it's free. Yes, we don't know what the pricing is. Atlassian's tie up with AWS, and we know all of Forge runs on AWS, and you can roughly guess how much your invocations cost. So you know what it's going to cost Atlassian. Hell, double it, and you've got your overheads. And even then, that's a negligible cost, generally speaking. The key here is to watch out for RFC 60 and the marketplace monetization strategies, specifically what they've announced they want to do but have no information of it that I see is coming, that is usage. So usage-based pricing. So I think that I would like, one of my questions to Atlassian when this gets talked about at Atlas Camp, and it will be talked about at Atlas Camp. I know because I'm part of the talk giving it. So, that I will have for Atlassian is, will I be able to do usage-based pricing before you start charging me usage-based? And if not, how do I mitigate that risk as a business? It's not Atlassian's responsibility to help me with pricing. It's not Atlassian's responsibility to set my pricing. Certainly not. That's price fixing. It is Atlassian's responsibility to enable me to run a business and to do so in a reasonably predictable and sane way. So it is not in Atlassian's interest. So Atlassian has stated that they've got a $1 billion marketplace and they want it to be a $4 billion marketplace. From that, you can extrapolate that Atlassian need to grow, right? So how are their actions contributing to growth? And so how is that, if you imagine that they come and surprise everyone with 10x type pricing, that's going to kill a bunch of, how is this helping their revenue to build? I mean, it's not. So you have to sort of sit in the world of sanity and go, well, whatever they announce is going to be reasonable. And if it's going to be unreasonable, we're going to hear about that a long time in advance for it not to be so disruptive, because the licensing stuff that's coming up, it's revenue numbers, right? This is the bread and butter of what keeps these companies in the ecosystem alive. And you'd be crazy to take a $1 billion marketplace and turn it into a $500 million because what, you didn't communicate or think about it. So when it comes to pricing and movement, I don't worry about that too much. What I do is make sure I'm in tune so that if I see any messaging coming out, that I'm aware of it. I'm in the rooms where they're talking about this, and I'm keeping my ear to the ground to make sure that I have that information when I need it. And then I model. And frankly, assuming you're not in the app fires at Adaptivists and big scale where you've got tens of thousands of users and you're running lots of code, most app vendors, their operational costs inside of AWS is not reaching 80% of the license fee that they're charging. That's not where the dominant part of their costs are going, especially in the customers that we're working with. And if it is, you should talk to us because that's a situation you probably want to resolve. But if you're running a reasonably well-run business, then it doesn't really matter what they charge in any of the bounds of sanity. And frankly, also, you're not moving massive workloads from onto Forge immediately. So those costs aren't $10,000 to your business on day one. These are things that you see coming on and you react and respond. It's things that are really easy because it's money, right? And it's cost-based, right? And it's your margin affected. It's really easy to get really worked up and really panicky about it. But it's not a thing that ultimately I've ever seen hurt a business to the point of consequence. But yeah, you should definitely be aware of it. So keep your ear to the ground and keep your eyes open.
Yeah, and then go ahead.
I want to quickly add one thing to what Dan said, and then I want to react to something Jimmy said. First off, I agree with Dan. I do feel it's on Atlassian to tell a clear future story to us. Like, tell the vision, tell the story. How do you want to grow to a $4 billion marketplace, and how do we fit in there? Like, it's telling that future vision is going to help us go through the changes with you. What I also wanted to talk about was Jimmy Wickens' comment about collaboration, communication, and understanding is key for a successful partnership. This is indeed a partnership, and a partnership between Atlassian and the partners is based on trust. Atlassian has done some things in the recent history that kind of broke that trust by accident, not by malicious intent. But I feel like this communication, the way they're doing this right now, is outreach to rebuild that trust. And it is indeed a partnership. It's not about blame games, angry faces, and being mad at each other all the time. It's about coming together, communicating. It's about putting in the effort to build that partnerships on both sides. And I feel like Atlassian is trying to do this. I feel like we as partners should be doing this too.
Yeah, and so I'd like to pick up Jimmy's next message about hating usage-based pricing, which I agree. I dislike it too. And that is a responsibility on us as marketplace vendors and people who are building solutions to make it so that there's less variability between the costs of servicing customers. So if one of our users is 1,000 times different or more expensive for us to run their workload than 10 other users, then that becomes really hard to do per user pricing because the variability in it and the consequences of it is really hard, unless it's like the differences between 1 cent and $1, right? If you're talking the difference to service them as being $10 to $1,000, you need to make sure you can pass that cost on. Otherwise, that is an existential threat to your business if someone can have uncapped ability to go off and anytime you place a cap or acceptable usable policy, you're effectively doing usage-based pricing, especially if you do unmetered top-ups and overages. But that's on us to be able to implement. But usage-based pricing I can see as being really useful in some areas. So making phone calls, for example, giving them 10 free minutes, and then you have to pay per minute after the old style of how phones were metered. And I can see with AI, and bloody hell, AI is power intensive and costly to run. No one seems to be actually making a profit out of AI right now, except for where they're being subsidized by OpenAI or someone else who is happy to absorb the cost. It's a really big problem that is way outside the scope for this as to how do we get an AI that actually balances out and isn't going to be consuming 80%. I mean, if you didn't know, every mid-journey image that you generate takes the same amount of powers to power an entire iPhone from dead. Every mid-journey image. This is the sort of amount of power and therefore cost that's coming in here. So I can imagine usage being number of tokens and requests and sort of things that fit inside the repo. But generally speaking, we should avoid it. Yes, I agree. And we should have a more predictable model. And frankly, and for most people's use cases, it's not that resource intensive to deliver your apps and run your things. And if it is, then we can probably help you too in figuring out how you can do it more efficiently and effectively. If you're ever worried about your AWS bill and you've not been through well-architected, and if you've not had a well-architected review, there are masses of AWS partners out there that will help you literally reduce your AWS bill. And you should definitely be using them. And if you don't know what your consultants are running inside of your infrastructure, that's your fault, not your consultant. Where are your guardrails, for goodness sake? There's Watchtower. Have you not got Watchtower running at least? Anyway.
So last 2 minutes, just 1 minute each. What's the thing you're most excited about this whole Forge in the head? And what's the thing that scares you the most, given your history in this space?
Most excited, the opportunity, because it's a reimagining of the existing world. The opportunity to rebuild something better than it used to be, to find new solutions to old problems, to find new problems to solve. Like there's a lot of opportunity to use our imagination. Most worried about people going out of business, people not being able to jump on the train, but jumping in front of the train, and people not working and coming together. And that's also where we as Atlas Advantage want to help build that bridge between partners and Atlassian.
Yeah, so mine builds on that in that 5, 6, 10 years ago, lots of people I recognize in the chat, we built a really good ecosystem where partners work together. Atlassian were communicating. There were app and connect weeks, and there were multiple of these events, and it felt like we were collaborating and building a bigger pie and working on this wonderful future together. And I see with Kieran and Chris coming in, and a lot of Atlassian recognizing that a lot of their hires before had steered away from that they dropped the ball with the extensibility or lack of inside of the Jira product discovery, and there are material changes taking place. They don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but I see that coming true. And I see a rebuilding of that ecosystem of feeling like we're working together rather than we're a knife fight in a pit. I'm worried that we don't get there fast enough and that the opportunity slips away, but I use that as a motivator for the former. And we need to start working together. Peter and I are back. We are community builders, and we're going to do everything in our power in order to be able to go off and rebuild the community as I've seen it built in the first place. The marketplace has become easy, and we're going to go through a hard time where everything's not on a plate. You're going to have to be a bit more innovative, and you're not going to be spoon-fed everything. You're going to have to get more involved. You're going to have to listen and watch. But for those that do, we're going to see a real resurgence, I think, of community. And I think that we're all going to be better as a result of that.
I want to say in difficult times, strong connections are forged.
Starts with the pun, ends with the pun.
Very punny.
Yep.
And with that, it's probably midnight for you. So, Rodney, over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Peter, Dan, for coming on. I wasn't sure if you guys were going to accept when we sent the offer out last week, but thank you so much. Really insightful. Everyone, thanks for watching. And as always, we didn't choose a Jira Life. Jira Life chose us.
And thank you for bye.
Thank you for listening to the Jira Life. Our hosts are Alex, Dr. Jira Ortiz, and Rodney, the Jira Guy, Nissen. You can find Alex on YouTube at 8Tech Tutorials, and Rodney's blog is found over at thejiraguy.com. Our producers are Robert King Bob Wen and Lina Ortiz. You can catch us live as we record this podcast every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on YouTube at The Jira Life. Be sure to join us and our other Jira Amigos of the Peanut Gallery every week to ask your questions, let us know your comments, and just tell us what you're up to. But if you can't join us live, you can still catch the replay over on YouTube. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell while you're watching. We're also available as a podcast over on Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you listen to it and think it deserves a rating, we would very much appreciate it, as it will help others discover the Jira Life. Because we didn't choose the Jira Life. The Jira Life chose us.